Hey guys, FaZe here, back with another Whispers of the Old Gods review video. Exciting times, guys. The expansion is just around the corner. It's supposed to air tomorrow on NA and the day after on EU. And as far as Asia goes, I'm not sure, but they're smart people. They can figure that out. Anyway, that makes this review all the more exciting. So the format is always going to be it's going to be the same as always. We're going to look at a card, make some notable observations about it, and try to assess whether the card is viable in Wild, Standard, and in the Arena. So with that all being said, guys, let's get right into the cards. First card we have for today is the World Champion Fiery Bat. 1 mana 2/1 Hunter Beast. Death Rattle, deal 1 damage to a random enemy. So the card this is most reminiscent of is actually Huge Toad. So Huge Toad has the exact same card effect text, except it's scaled down. Fiery Bat is scaled down by 1 mana and 1/1 worth of stats. The thing about this is the 1 damage is actually a lot more relevant a turn earlier. So if you get to play this in the early turns, it's very, very good. But as most 1-drops do, it loses impact drastically later in the game. So it's a very strong card if you're looking to gain if you're looking to gain board control very early in the game and close out the game very quickly. So it's a good card in face hunter oriented, like in face hunter decks. But whether or not that archetype is going to be viable is kind of questionable, just because the amount of defensive tools that have been printed in Whispers of the Old Gods is actually just staggering. To be honest, there have been so many heals and taunts and such things that have been printed in this expansion, so I'm not sure how well Face Hunter is going to fare against all that. Also, with the nerf of Owl, that gets substantially weaker because all of a sudden your curve is now clunkier. So we'll have to see how that goes. But aside from that, this is a standalone very good card. I'm just not sure whether or not the archetype this fits in is going to be viable. Yeah, that's about it for this card. I think it might see some play in Wild, just because in Wild the early board control is that much more important. In Standard, though, things might be a little bit slower. Maybe I don't know. We just have to see how viable the Face Hunter archetype is to make a valid judgment whether or not this will see play. Definitely a card worth experimenting with, though. And in the Arena, it's a very good 1-drop. It provides you that early board control which Hunter needs to deal that, early face damage, so he can close out the game with his hero power. So it fits Hunter's Arena game plan very, very good, and it's a common, so you will see it often in Arena, and it's a very, very good pick, I believe. Next card we have is the Flamewreathed Faceless. It's a 4 mana 7/7 Overload 2 Shaman Minion. This guy is actually straight up overpowered, just because nothing deals 7 damage on turn 4, kind of how nothing deals 8 damage on turn 5 as far as Fel Reaver is concerned, right? So the thing about this is, yeah, you overload, but it goes very well with the Eternal Sentinel that Shaman is getting, the 2 mana 3/2 that actually unlocks your mana crystals. So just because of that, it's this card is insane. Also, Shaman is very much a win-more class, so if you can get on the board earlier, that's very good for you. This is a very aggressive card, so I think Face Shaman might take to a more board-oriented approach, slightly more board-oriented approach. But yes, definitely a very strong card, and definitely going to see a good amount of play, I believe, in Wild as well. it is very much worth it to like play this for just for the face damage, basically. And the fact that we're getting redundancy with the overload removal is also very good. Yeah, that's about it for this card. As far as playability, it's going to please see play everywhere, to be honest. It's a very good card. It's going to see play in Wild and in Standard and in the Arena because it's a common. And again, even if you don't get the overload removal cards, this is very good in Arena just because Shaman as a class is very much a win more class. So the fact that you can just lock down the board with a minion like this, because this is unremovable on turn 4, essentially, aside from something like a Polymorph or Hex. Fireball, it's basically, Fireball doesn't deal with this, it's basically unremovable by direct damage. So, very, very strong card, expected to see play in Arena as well. Next card we have is Forbidden Ritual, 0 mana, Warlock rare spell, spend all your mana, summon that many 1/1 tentacles. So, it's the Forbidden spell for Warlocks. It's one of the more playable ones, to be honest. I think only this one and the Forbidden Healing have the potential to see play in Constructed. This is it's an interesting card. The fact of the matter is, it's very flexible, just like all the Forbidden spells. But the thing that it does actually fits the Warlock Zoo-esque type of deck very well. And with Implosion rotating out, this may very well find a home in the Zoo. So it's noteworthy that this is the best place to play this is on turn 3. It's kind of like how Muster for Battle is good on turn 3, because on turn 4 and 5 you start walking into these AoE effects like Swipe, like Consecration, like Holy Nova, and it just gets worse and worse the higher you go. Also, the amount of mana you invest is dependent on how many 1/1s you get. So, basically, the AoE, the player that is doing the AoE damage is likely not losing that much tempo just for killing Forbidden Ritual. But it is substantially better than something like Stand Against Darkness, which is only 5 mana. You can only cast it on 5. It's exactly 5 minions. It's very inflexible in that way. But that's not saying much. It could see some play, I believe, in Standard, just because Implosion is rotating out and Warlock needs another way to flood the board. But at the same time, a lot of cards are getting printed that deal 1 damage AoE. Think Ravaging Ghoul, the 3 mana 3/3 warrior minion that whirlwinds the board on a battle cry. Think Twilight Flamecaller, I believe his name was, the 3 mana 2/2 that Arcane Explosions the board. Right, so basically there is no more safe turn to play this, except on turn 2. Then you're only getting 2/2s. So it's at that point it's kind of like worse than Living Roots, like a lot worse, twice as worse. But it can be used still with things like Knife Juggler, and it can be used if you can bait out an AoE effect. It can be used to refill the board. So it's definitely not unplayable, but definitely not a 2-of, I don't think. It's an interesting card. It's an interesting card, but it definitely will see play in Standard. In Wild, it won't see play just because Implosion does what this card is trying to do, but better. And in the Arena, I mean, in the Arena, board clears are a lot more scarce. So this is actually a bit better in the Arena. So yeah, it's a pretty decent card in Arena as well. It also gives you targets for like stuff like Power Overwhelming, which is a lot more powerful in Arena than in Constructed, just because the power level of Constructed as a whole is a lot higher. So, and Power Overwhelming is a common, so definitely a playable card in the Arena as well. Next card we have is the Grotesque Dragonhawk, a 7 mana 5/5 Wind Fury. Now the closest minion or card I can compare this to is Wind Fury Harpy. It's 1 mana more expensive, but has 1 more stat. You're still overpaying by a lot, so it's essentially a worse Wind Fury Harpy, in my eyes at least. So for that reason, this I don't think sees play anywhere. The way Blizzard treats Wind Fury, they treat it as though it has twice as much attack, but the twice as much attack is only valid when you're hitting face, which is most often not the case. So pretty unplayable card. I don't expect this to see play in Standard, Wild, or in the Arena. It's even a bad Arena card. Next card we have is Infested Wolf, a 4 mana 3/3 Hunter rare beast. Death Rattle, summon 2 1/1 spiders. So Hunter is getting all these somewhat unimpressive cards for the most part, right? Like the stats on this are just right. I think if it was like a 4/2, it might be just a bit too good because of we've seen how 4 attack for mana minions with Death Rattle are very, very good, if you know what I mean. But it's a very unimpressive card. It's very well balanced. The thing is, cards like this and cards like Carrion Grub, which we actually looked over in the last video, is that they make Houndmaster that much better. They make Houndmaster ridiculous, right? This basically guarantees that your Houndmaster will hit a beast. It guarantees that your kill command will get the 2 damage buff, right? So yeah, very, very good. Houndmaster is actually broken if you can guarantee his battle cry, and this card does exactly that. It kind of clashes with it a little bit, so it's not, you know, super insane just because they share the main mana slot, but for the, you know, the curve out plan, you do have the Carrion Grub, the 3 mana 2/5, which is basically unremovable on turn 3 to hit with the Houndmaster. So yeah, seemingly unimpressive cards actually making Hunter a lot better, just because Houndmaster is that sleeper card that you never think of as OP just because it doesn't have the right supporting cards, and these are in fact the right supporting cards. So I think this will see a lot of play. It trades it could even see play in Wild just because it trades evenly with Shredder. Often the 2/1/1s are about equal to that random 2-drop that's going to spawn. And again, the Houndmaster synergy is ridiculous. This might push mid-range Hunter over the top, in my opinion. So definitely we'll see play in Standard, probably in Wild as well, and in the Arena. This is it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's gonna guarantee that base synergy that you're always looking for in Arena. So it's pretty good there as well. Next card we have is Midnight Drake, 4 mana 1/4 battle cry. Gain 1 attack for each other card in your hand. It's a dragon and it's rare, so it's essentially Twilight Drake's brother, the corrupted version of Twilight Drake. The fact of the matter is, though, that the attack is not nearly as relevant as the health is on Twilight Drake. No matter how high this thing's attack is, it's always going to be 4 health. 4 health is fairly easy to deal on turn 4. Think True Silver Champion, right? Think Deathspite in Wild. Think Flame Cannon in Wild. It's just even like something like Frostbolt Ping kills this on turn 4 with no tempo loss, right? So it's a very bad card. It's a very bad card just because it doesn't gain value for the fact that you are anti-tempoing yourself to save cards. And if you save a lot of cards, that means your opponent is ahead on the board when you play this, and they're just going to trade very efficiently into it. You're going to trade like even something like a Bloodfang Raptor, like some sort of 3/2, and just ping it off. So it's a very, very bad card. And don't expect to see play at all in any format. Sometimes you will be forced to pick this in Arena, but aside from that, you're probably not going to see this card. Next card we have is Nat Darkfisher. So it's the corrupted version of Nat Pago. But instead, he's overstatted, right? But he draws cards for your opponent. So this is a very interesting card. I like the design of this card. It's very good only in mill decks, right? It's only good in mill decks. It's not good anywhere else. The fact that you're giving your opponent card advantage means that you want to get tempo in return. That's kind of like the trade-off that you want to be doing. But like a 2/4 is not really that much tempo because the attack is not that high. It's not very aggressively statted, so it doesn't work in an aggressive deck. In a defensive deck, which is like trying to outvalue your opponent, you don't want to be giving them card advantage. So it's only in that specific archetype that this guy you would find a home, essentially. Nowhere else. It's pretty unplayable in any kind of other deck, no matter what the format is. So next card we have is the Nerubian Prophet. It's a 6-mana 4/4 common minion. At the start of your turn, reduce this card's cost by 1. So if you keep it on turn 1, right? If you keep it in your opening hand, you can play this on turn 3. 3-mana 4/4 is pretty big. It's pretty big. It's definitely not unremovable, like a 5 health minion on 3 mana, but it's pretty big. It's constructed worthy, a 3-mana 4/4. The problem is you're giving up a mulligan slot for that, and if you top deck it, like somewhere down the line, for example, if you top deck it on turn 2, it's not playable on turn 3 anymore. And I'm not sure how this interacts, but for example, I'm not sure if you top deck it and does it trigger on the top deck turn? Does that count? Like, if it doesn't, this card is virtually horrible. But if it does, it's still pretty bad, but it's a lot more playable. The thing is, you can't really build your mana curve around this card just because you don't know when you're going to draw it. And it's a lot less impactful later in the game, so it kind of like peaks at that 3 mana, but then you have to give a mulligan slot for it. So overall, not very good. I don't expect this to see play in any constructed format. In the arena, it's a common, so you're sometimes going to pick it, and you're not going to be too unhappy about it, right? You sometimes keep a 3/4, a 3-mana minion in your opening hand, depending on what deck you're playing, but not a spectacular card in arena by any means as well. So next card we have On the Hunt, a 1-mana Hunter spell, common. Deal 1 damage, summon a 1/1 Mastiff. So the closest thing to this is Elven Archer. It's pretty much Elven Archer in spell form. The key differences to note is that, first of all, it is a spell, so it works with things like Lock and Load. Right? It works with things like Lock and Load, and it is a beast, so it works with stuff, again, like Houndmaster, right? Like Kill Command as well. So it's a better Elven Archer and Hunter. That's not saying too much. Elven Archer is a pretty good card. I'm one of the bigger fans of Elven Archer, actually. In Arena specifically, it's not like constructed worthy or anything. But just the fact that this is a the Mastiff that you summon from this is a beast is kind of a big deal. You can go On the Hunt Kill Command if you really need to. You can go Hunter's Mark On the Hunt. Yes, Hunter's Mark has been nerfed, but I think that only indicates that Hunter's Mark was actually overpowered, and it was. and it would have been way too overpowered going forward in this mid-rangey, slightly more bulky metagame. So you could, this is probably like if you put a 1-of in your deck, you're not unhappy with it, right? You get to deal with like early game minions, you get to enable Hunter's Mark without necessarily having to combo it with Unleash the Hounds, or something like Pyromancer, for example. This does not work with Pyromancer, just because you would kill the 1/1 Mastiff, but you get my point. It combos well with Hunter's Mark, it combos well with Beasts, it combos well with Houndmaster, so it's a very good 1-mana card, right? The issue is that it is a 1-mana card. 1-mana cards are weak. You can only make a 1-mana card so strong before you break the game. But yeah, definitely I think it's playable in standard along like as a 1-of. And in Wild, it could see some play in like a mid-range-ish Hunter. But, you know, Web Spinner kind of does the same thing, except it doesn't deal 1 damage, but it draws you a card. So it's kind of like, I don't know, you could run this in Wild as well, just because, again, the early game board control is very much important. And the Beast, it, you know, brings your Beast consistency up as well. So definitely playable in Wild. In Standard, pardon me, but in Wild, it's maybe a bit too low power level to see play in Wild. Kind of how Elven Archer is a bit too low power level in general. And yeah, in the arena, it's pretty good. Again, it brings up your Beast consistency, right, which you always want to get as a Hunter. And Elven Archer is very good for Hunter, just because Hunters cannot deal 1 damage in the arena. So, you know, it fills that caveat of the Hunter class as well. So, pretty good card in arena. I would say it's a pretty good pick. One of the very much above average, to be sure. Next card we have is a Primal Fusion, a 1-mana Shaman spell. Give a minion +1/+1 for each of your totems. So, it's essentially a totem carver in spell form, sort of. The only, you know, difference is that it's more flexible than totem carver, because you can use it for 1 mana. For this to be worth it, let's get the let's get down to the math, right? For this to be worth it, you would have to be, you know, you'd have to have 2 totems, so it'd kind of be 1 mana Mark of the Wild, right? But for you to have 2 totems on the board, it means you're generally winning. Again, Shaman is one of the most win more classes, so I don't think this is too good. There's just a better win more cards in Shaman. So for that reason, like, if you have 2 minions on the board and they're specifically totems, at which point this becomes, you know, reasonable, and not even like that reasonable, you would have to get the full curve value out of this. So you would have to have a perfect curved turn with this, where you don't waste any mana, and you have 2 totem minions on the board. That's very, very specific, right? So if you have 2 totem minions on the board, then something like Flame Tongue would be a lot more powerful, right? Because it's kind of like the ultimate win more card, sort of. So just because of that, I don't think Primal, like, when you look at it, it's just pales in comparison, I think. So also, I don't think there's enough totem support cards, right? You have like the Totem Golem, you have the Flame Tongue Totem, because if you're hero powering to make this work, it's generally not worth it for the most part, because you're going to lose board control sooner or later. So there's Flame Tongue, there's Totem Golem, Mana Tide is sometimes, Vitality Totem, it's pushing it, and Tuskarr Totemic. But you don't want to generally play all of these in the same deck. So for all the reasons that I just mentioned, I think this is a pretty underwhelming card, and we'll probably not see play in Constructed. And in the arena, it's pretty bad as well, just because you can't guarantee that you get your totems in arena. Yeah, if you get a lot of totems, it's pretty good. but it's definitely not worth it just from the hero power of the Shaman. Definitely not. It's a below average pick in Arena for sure. Okay, so next card we have is the Psychotron, 5 mana, 3/4. Taunt and Divine Shield mech. So it's the corrupted version of the Annoyatron. It's basically a bigger Annoyatron. But it's not. I don't think it's safe to good to compare it with Annoyatron, because Annoyatron serves a very different purpose. Annoyatron serves the purpose to be annoying, and just eat up your opponent's attacks without actually doing anything. So it's a very like aggressive taunt minion, if that makes sense. But this is much closer to Sunwalker, actually. So it's 1 mana less, but you lose 1/1 stats. The thing about Sunwalker and why Sunwalker is actually sometimes good is there is a cap on how high statted vanilla minions you can play, because the higher the stats, the higher the mana, and at some point around 6 mana, right, things become very clunky and hard to play without actually giving too much tempo to your opponent, because you are not answering their board, you're just playing a big dude. And Sunwalker works well with that cap, right? It's kind of relevant at that cap. Psychotron is definitely not. Like the 3 attack just doesn't quite cut it. The 4 health is kind of irrelevant for the most part. It's substantially weaker. Like the fact that like the difference between 3 and 4 is huge in Hearthstone, and the difference between 4 and 5 is even bigger. So it's way overcosted. It's not going to see play. It's not going to, I don't think, serve any great purpose in Standard. And in Wild, you always have Sludge Belcher, so there's no reason to play this. In the Arena, it's a common, so you're going to see it from time to time. But like, it's not that great of a card on turn 5. Is what I'm trying to say. The 3 attack is like really underwhelming. So yeah, it's an okay card in Arena, but aside, it's like average, I would say, slightly above average. Yeah, that's where I would rate it. Somewhere around like maybe like a 55 or 60, I think. But anyway, moving on. We have the Selfless Hero. It's a Paladin. 1 mana, 2/1 rare minion. Death Rattle, give a random friendly minion Divine Shield. So, Paladin is kind of forming to, we have that theme with Paladin forming, which is Divine Shields. We had the Steward of Darkshire released earlier this month. And, yeah, Paladin seems to be the Divine Shield class, along with stuff like Hand of Protection, right? Hand of Protection and Argent Protector and Minibot and Seal of Champions. They're very much the Divine Shield class. So, they're getting that kind of theme to them expanded upon, which is nice. And as far as this card's power level goes, it's pretty good. It's, in the best case scenario, it's shielded Minibot levels of good. The thing is, the best case scenario is not going to be achievable most of the time. Keep in mind, if you coin this out on turn 1, if you play this on turn 1, your opponent will absolutely always coin hero power to remove it if they're playing a ping hero power class. Just because this is ridiculously scary. You cannot afford to play a 2-drop while this is on the board. So, just because of that, it's kind of like an okay tempo card, just because it forces your opponent to play a little bit subpar as far as tempo is concerned. Are 1 mana 2/1s worth it if you just play them for your opponent to hero power? Probably not. Probably not. Most of the time they aren't. But I think you can make reasonable work with this card, especially with the other new Paladin card. I forget the name, the 1 mana +1/+2. So it's Paladin is kind of getting that early game help that they need, but it's like very, very early game. And this kind of fits that. And if you can manage to get a Divine Shield on a trade and get a Divine Shield on a minion, which is sometimes going to happen, this card is ridiculously powerful, I think. Like a 1 mana, essentially 2/1 Divine Shield is insane. The only reason this is balanced is because it's a death rattle. But yeah, I think it's definitely going to see play in Standard. In Wild, not so much, just because a Shielded Minibot exists, and it's kind of hard to curve one into the other. It's kind of awkward. And you always want to play Shielded Minibot on 2. That card is ridiculous. So yeah, just because of that, probably don't want to play this in Wild, but in Standard, it's I think it's a pretty good early game replacement for Minibot. It's not as busted as Minibot, but that's a good thing. Minibot is ridiculous. Yeah, and in the arena, this card is pretty good. You can basically guarantee that your opponent will remove it if they can, if this is on an empty board. Like if you get this off to work in arena, you're sitting in a really good spot. And just the danger of this card is like alone is worth picking it, I believe. If it is better if you coin it out with another 1-drop, just so that your opponent can deal with both of them. So you kind of get start rolling. Because if you coin it out on turn 1 with another 1-drop, then your opponent maybe hero powers the other 1-drop to not give you the value, but then you just play a 2-drop and trade. Right, so it's promoting a very aggressive play style with a lot of 1-drops. So just thought I'd throw that out there. A Paladin is forming to be one of the aggressive classes in the new expansion. But going back to Arena, it's definitely a pretty good card in Arena as well. Next card, we have the Rallying Blade, a Paladin, a 3-mana 3/2 rare weapon. Battlecry, give +1/+1 to your minions with Divine Shield. So, over the course of Hearthstone, we've learned that 3-mana 3-attack weapons are actually okay. You have things like Power Mace, which saw play. Power Mace was ridiculous with mechs, but that's beside the point. It's like 3-mana for a 3/2 weapon is pretty good. Eaglehorn Bow has always been around. King's Defender is also actually an okay card. It's just that the ridiculousness that is Fiery War Axe is what makes these cards pale, right? So let's remove that. Let's move get that out of the way. The thing is, this card is like totally worth it if you can buff one thing with it. If you can buff one thing with this weapon, it's already very, very good, I think. And how hard is it to buff a minion with this? Well, it's probably more difficult than you would expect, but you do have those things in Paladin, like it synergizes very well with stuff like Hand of Protection, which so maybe you have reason to play one of Hand of Protection now. It also goes well a lot with the Selfless Hero, right? It also goes well with the Steward of Darkshire. So you put enough Divine Shield synergies into one deck, that deck is gonna work at some point, right? So yeah, for that reason alone, I think the Rallying Blade is gonna see a reasonable amount of play. It's also a weapon. The biggest minus to this is that it actually curves into True Silver, which is kind of awkward. It kind of like the second charge of this bleeds into your True Silver turn. So maybe you want to run only one True Silver, but if you're running a lot of Divine Shields, maybe Blessing of Kings is more suited to your deck, because Blessing of Kings works ridiculously well with Divine Shields. But I digress. I think this is a very much a playable card. It's also playable in Wild, I believe, just because, again, a shielded Minibot is still going to be there. right? You curve a mini bot into this. It's ridiculous. If your opponent can't ping it off, it's ridiculous. It's just outright broken. So definitely playable in Wild as well. And in the arena, it's a weapon. Weapons are very, very good in arena. Eagle Horn Bow is very good in arena, even if you don't have traps. So Rallying Blade will see play there as well. It's pretty good. Also in arena, Argent Protector is very it's a very top tier pick. Minibot is a very top tier pick, so it kind of like goes well with Paladin in arena, and that's nice. That's nice. It's a very good card in arena, I think. Next card we have is the Mage spell Shatter, a 2-mana common mage spell. Destroy a frozen minion. So destroy a minion for 2 mana is very, very good. I don't know if you know that. If you have like 2 mana kill a minion, that is ridiculous. Okay. The thing is, freeze effects are kind of scarce. So let's look at the freeze cards one by one and see whether or not Shatter fits in a deck with that particular freeze card. So let's look at the neutrals. We have Frost Elemental. It's cute, but it's kind of like 8 mana Assassinate that uses 2 cards. It's kind of like Blade of Cthulhu. It's like a very, very slow thing. I don't know if you want to do that. If the meta is that slow, then I don't know. There's something wrong if the meta is that slow. So if you do it with Ice Lance, I don't know. I don't know if these 2 cards would fit together, right? You rarely would. You're kind of like 2-for-1ing yourself, right? You get to kill anything for 3 mana, but you're 2-for-1ing yourself. And Ice Lance is generally want to go face for the most part. You have Frostbolt, but again, 2-for-1ing yourself. Frostbolt is like a better contender than Ice Lance is, though. But if you're running a lot, like a very freeze-heavy deck, maybe you run those. With Snow Trigger is not really that good because, again, you're 2-for-1ing yourself. Snow Trigger will probably die, whatever it hits into. You don't really want to play this in a Frost Nova Mage deck because you would much rather just play Doomsayer instead. Like, yeah, just play Doomsayer and nuke the whole board, right? Instead of just shattering one of the frozen minions. It could see a play in a Freeze Mage deck, like as a one-of, but other than that, it's not worth it with Frost Nova. Cone of Cold, another one. It's kind of has like the Frost Nova issue. You don't really want to shatter. You put Shatter in like, or at least not too many copies of Shatter into like a Cone of Cold deck. You'd much rather play Doomsayer. Water Elemental is pretty good, but if, like, imagine the thing that you wanted to kill has 6 health, then just Shatter becomes just like a Frostbolt, right? Because the Water Elemental would deal the 3 damage to it already. So, I don't know. At that point, is that really worth it? I don't think so. Blizzard, again, in a freeze kind of deck, you don't really want to play that. You don't really want to play Shatter. Maybe, again, as one of in like a freeze mage deck to deal with something like a Ragnaros, but even then it's a little bit pushing it. Maybe to replace BGH in like some sort of freeze value-oriented mage, but I digress. The only way this card is good, the only way this card is good is if the Freeze Waker, I'm going to call it, the 4-mana 2/4 that freezes a minion whenever you cast a spell, if that's good, if that turns out to be very, very good, then Shatter is playable. And if it's not, then Shatter is, you're probably not going to see it very much. Freeze, like the Freeze Waker is not playable in Wild, I don't think. Just because there's like so many minions, it's so zooey all over the place. And even with something like Flamewaker, like even at 3 mana, it's kind of hard to combo it. You know what I mean? So at 4, it's substantially more difficult going to be. So for that reason, I don't think we will see too much of Shatter in Constructed, aside from maybe the occasional sprinkle in a Freeze Mage deck. And in the arena, this card is completely unplayable, unless you have like a million Frostbolts. But even then, yeah, then maybe it's good. But even then, you're still 2 for 1 yourself, so you have to make the card advantage back somehow. It's very, very below average. It's near unplayable in arena. Next card we have is the Southsea Squidface. It's a 4-mana 4/4 common pirate rogue minion. Death Rattle will give your weapon +2 attack. So this may have been the reason that Blade Flurry got nerfed. I don't know. But just because Blade Flurry got nerfed, this makes this card a lot worse. 4-mana 4/4 is not very impressive. The Death Rattle is it's pretty good. You're kind of like putting a deadly poison on top of a minion, which is pretty nice. But just the body is very underwhelming. So I don't think it's worth it as a, on its own, uninclude. As a standalone card, I don't think it's worth it. And I don't think it's good enough to warrant putting other pirates in your deck to make that sort of justification. So for that reason, I don't think this guy is very good. I think he's just missing that little extra something. The Blade Flurry really hurt this card, I believe. The Blade Flurry nerf. Yeah, you kind of like the turn that you get your deadly poison effect on is at the earliest turn 5, or if you coin this out on turn 4. But then how did maybe you played Dagger up and then you coined this out on turn 3, right? So at the earliest it's a turn 4, but that's kind of like very, very specific. So on average it's going to be on turn 5. And on turn 5, that 3 damage is not that relevant. At turn 5, the minions you're going to be hitting are pretty clunky, pretty big, and you don't want to be hitting into those too much because your face is very precious as a rogue. Like it's rogue's hero power is very, very good in the early game, but it scales quite poorly into the late game for that simple reason. So for that, because of that, I don't think this guy is good enough to see any sort of competitive play. Well, not any sort of, but definitely not a staple in any kind of road deck. And it's not good enough to warrant a pirate deck. It's nowhere near as good as something like the warrior card, the warrior pirate card, the 3-mana 3/4 that buffs your weapon by +1/+1 if you control a pirate. That is way more powerful. So yeah, I'm probably not gonna see this guy around. In arena, it's okay, right? It's great value in arena. So it's an okay card in arena. You should probably pick it if you see it. Very much above average, but definitely not like super duper top tier. It's pretty good, but again, it has the problem that it comes out a little late, and at that point the minions are pretty big. You don't really want to be hitting into those big minions. Next card we have is the Squirming Tentacle, 3-mana 2/4 taunt minion. Yeah, its stats are like it deals very well with 3/2s, but it deals poorly with 2/3s because it trades 1 for 1, sort of. If over 2 turns, right? So it's okay as a very early 3/2 counter. So if the meta becomes full of like 3/2s, this is a good card. But even then, it's only good in the early game because the impact of this 3-mana card in the late game is very minimal. So because of that, I don't think this sees play. It's a very good like anti-aggro card, just because most of the aggressive deck minions are aggressively statted, so they're mostly 3/2s. You rarely see 2/3s in aggressive decks. Flame Juggler, for example, being the exception. But I digress. It's an okay card, just missing that little bit of extra something, I think, to see that much play. Think of how Wormrest Agent is very good on turn 2, right? It's the same card, but it's 1 mana less. You bump it up by 1 mana, it's all of a sudden very mediocre, right? 3 damage, albeit pretty high for turn 3. It's definitely not insurmountable. So yeah, don't expect to see too much of this guy unless the metagame becomes full of 3/2s for some reason. Not in Wild and not in Standard. Maybe in Wild if you want to run like some very anti-aggro things, but at that point, why don't you just put Deathlord in your deck? Because Wild does have Deathlord. All in all, the moral from this card is just put early game removal in your deck. In the arena, it's an okay card. It's kind of like an Ironfur Grizzly with like the defensive stats. It is going to kill 2/3s, and if you're playing a ping class, this is substantially better as it finishes off. If it finishes off 2/3s, if they trade into it. So yeah, a lot better in classes with ping hero powers. Next card we have is the Stormcrack, 2 mana Shaman common spell, deal 4 damage to a minion, overload 1. So this is supposed to be the spiritual successor to something like Crackle. It's nowhere near as good as Crackle, just because first of all, it doesn't go face. Second of all, Crackle averages 4.5. It's never going to be 4.5, but in 3 out of the 4 cases of Crackle is as good or better than this. So yeah, for that reason, Stormcrack is probably not. You can kind of look at it as like a Shadow Bolt, I think, just because it's essentially the same card, but you have the overload. So it's better than Shadow Bolt because Shaman has those overload unlocking effects, but Shadow Bolt is very mediocre to begin with, right? So it's not like saying it's slightly better than Shadow Bolt is not like a huge improvement. You're definitely not going to see this played in Wild, just because you would not like Crackle does what this card does and a lot better on average, at least. But in Standard, you might see this just because the unlock minion, the unlock overload minion is just that good. If this sees played in Standard, it's going to be because of that card. Okay, next card we have is the Twisted Worgen. Oh, and pardon me, in the arena, this is removal, so it's very much it's very welcome in your deck. Any sort of removal in arena is good. It's essentially a Shadow Bolt, so in arena, Shadow Bolt is acceptable, right? So yeah, it's an okay card in arena, and it's a common, so you are going to see it, and it will get the offering bonus, so you will see this card a lot, and you should probably pick it. It's pretty good in arena. Again, next card we have is the Twisted Worgen, 2 mana, 3/1 common stealth minion. So this is supposed to be the corrupted version of the Worgen Infiltrator. It's pretty much as good as a Worgen Infiltrator. The problem with this is it's basically a face card, right? Because it has stealth and it has 3 attack. So it's basically a face card. The thing is, though, a lot of cards are printed that, again, deal a lot of 1 damage AoEs. So cards like Twisted Worgen actually become a lot less, and also Worgen Infiltrator become a lot less powerful. So for that reason, I don't think this is competitively playable, just because of the amount of 1 damage AoE that is getting printed out. But in arena, it's definitely a very good card because, well, it's like the Worgen Infiltrator. It's good because, like, for the same reason that Worgen Infiltrator is good, because it's stealth and you can just sit on it until you get, you know, a reasonable trade with it. So it's pretty good. Next card we have is Usher of Souls, a 5-mana 5/6 common minion for warlocks. This card is pretty bad, and it's not because the card is standalone bad. The card standalone is quite okay. It's a 5-mana 5/6 with upside. It's just bad because Warlock has no Cthulhu, either buffing Cthulhu cards or Cthulhu conditional cards like the Ancient Shield Bearer for Warrior, or the 5-mana 6/5 for Priest. I forget the name. So for that reason, a Cthulhu Warlock is not going to be viable, just because half of what makes a Cthulhu deck viable is the conditional cards that help you get to Cthulhu, essentially. So yeah, just because of that, this is not really that playable. Also, if you look at it another way, in a very aggressive zoo-esque type of deck, in which you have a lot of tokens. First of all, you generally want to go face with the tokens because your opponent doesn't have enough attacks to deal with them, if they haven't cleared the board already. Second of all, you kind of don't want to curve as high as 5 mana, unless, you know, Doomguard, just because it's it becomes very clunky. Because your hero power is so good at drawing cards, you can maintain the tempo in somewhat later stages of the game without actually putting big minions into your deck, because the trademark of Zoo is actually just efficiency, right? And this is kind of it's a pretty good minion, but again, not playable with Cthulhu, because like Cthulhu Warlock is not going to be a thing, because they don't have enough Cthulhu cards, and it's not really worth to play this in like a token or, you know, aggressive Zooey type of Warlock deck. And in the arena, this card, it will not be playable because it's a Cthulhu card. Cthulhu cards, again, will not be available in the arena. Okay, so next card we have is the Zealous Initiate. It's a 1-mana 1/1, Death Rattle. Give a random friendly minion +1/+1. It's a common minion. So this guy is quite underwhelming because, well, just because it's a 1-mana 1/1. You could look at it as like a 1-mana 2/2, but it's not really a 1-mana 2/2 because it doesn't actually trade into anything. And if your opponent plays like a 3/2 and you have a 3/2, then you don't want to play this. It's also very, very, very inconsequential in the late stage of the game, because by that point your opponent can usually take care of the other minions first. It's a lot easier to allocate the mana to deal with the other minions first, and then ping this off, for example, because your opponent has a lot more free mana. But yeah, that's just about it for the card. It's not good in the early game because it doesn't trade well. And the fact that it's Death Rattle means that your opponent can actually choose what they do with it. And in the late stages of the game, it's really bad because, again, your opponent is a lot more freed in terms of mana to deal with this, and it's a lot like it's a lot less impactful. So it's essentially a never 1-mana 2/2. And for that reason, this card is completely unplayable in Constructed, I think. In the arena, it's a 1-drop. Like, even in the arena, it's pretty bad, actually. It's just the stats on it don't perform very well. Only if your opponent plays a 1-drop themselves, and only if they do that first, because they would never play a 1-drop after you play this. Especially, they might, but especially not specifically a 2/1. So yeah, something to note in arena. This card is a lot better if you have a lot of 2/3s, because 2/3s are a lot better stat line to buff with like +1/+1. Kind of like how Shattered Sun Cleric is a lot better on 2/3s than on 3/2s. Just because it becomes a 3/4, which which actually kills 3/2s as well and survives, as opposed to a 4/3. So yeah, but I just thought I'd throw that in there as kind of a note about the card. Definitely not good in any sort of format, I don't think. In Arena, it's below average, and in Constructed, it's pretty much trashed here. So yeah, and well, guys, that is it for all the cards. We got through them, and yeah, it's been an exciting experience, let me tell you that much. Just me trying to make the review as good as possible. I've learned a lot about the cards. I've learned a lot about what the meta could be and how the classes are shaping. So I encourage you to do the same. I encourage you to take a look at the cards, try to think of situations in which the cards would be good. Let me know about the cards that you're excited. I can't wait to hear from anybody who has some thoughts to share. And yeah, it's time now to stop theory crafting with the cards and actually get a chance to play with them ourselves. But yeah, that's it for the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed the series, and yeah, if you did, leave a like, and thank you so much for watching, guys. It's been an enlightening experience, to say the least. But yeah, that's it for the video, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.